afternoon and welcome to another one of IPC's training seminar series. Today we will be focusing on the administration side of the MiVoice Connect platform. And the training will be led by IPC's very own Director of Technical Escalations, Simon Newberry. The training is typically about 45 minutes long. We do welcome questions, so you can please leave any questions you have there in the questions bar, and we can address those at the end of the training. So with that, Simon, I'll turn it over to you and take it away. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending. Looking forward to sharing some really good information with you. We did have a previous administration webinar for MiVoice Connect that is on our website. We record all of these webinars. Please feel free to go to our website and explore previous recordings. Glad you could join us today so we can show you an updated version of this information. Today I'm actually going to be showing you a demo system that I recently set up, and we're going to go through the Connect Director and also to provide some updated information on administration best practices on what to look for in your system, how to best serve your users' needs, as well as at the end of the day your customer needs, because that's what we're all here for, is addressing what the needs of the customers are, whoever our customers may be. With that being said, I'm going to switch my screen over to the demo system. As Stephen said, please feel free to submit any questions in chat and we'll make sure to get those addressed. If you can't see the TeamViewer session with the demo system, please send a chat message and we'll make sure to get that addressed, but everybody should be seeing that now. To let everybody know, this is a fresh install. The previous MiVoice Connect admin webinar actually showed a configured system. We're taking a different tack this time, and we're going to show you kind of what to look for in a blank system, how to start configuration. I put a few small things in here just to kind of get things started, but it's going to be pretty sparse until we start adding things to the system. Before we actually start reviewing the Connect Director, I'd like to remind everybody, or even tell you if you're beginning and not familiar with the product already, this is a software solution that runs on a server on top of your infrastructure. A lot of administrators, it's easy to lose track of the fact that these software solutions come with a set of best practices. That's what IPC excels at, is developing world-class best practices that we'd stand up against anybody else's to make sure that this system is going to run rock solid within your environment. Every environment is unique. It comes with unique security challenges, unique infrastructure challenges. And that's what we specialize in, is making sure we can create a secure system that's configured to meet your needs and to perform for your executions to give you all the functionality that you're looking for. With that being said, we're going to dive in here. When you first sign into Director, obviously there's going to be a couple different ways. It's going to be, it does offer Active Directory authentication, as hopefully everything does these days, as well as just local authentication you can manage within the PBX system itself. Once you sign in, it's going to take you directly to the maintenance page, the maintenance dashboard here, and it's going to kind of give you a overview of the current system status. You can look at the last hour, 12 hours, 1 day, 7 days, all the way back to 30 days. The system retains kind of system summary state data. We can see our call volumes for the total system, call quality via MOS scores or mean opinion scores. Bandwidth utilization by site, you can configure what your expected bandwidth utilization would be, or bandwidth availability for each site. Highest trunk group utilization, we'll get into trunk groups a little later here. Moving down some additional information that can be useful. As administrators, our main focus is making sure the system is healthy and able to serve the needs of the users, so they can in turn serve the needs of the customers. With that being said, I'm going to be showing you basically a focus on how to keep the system stable, how to get that configured to be as rock solid as possible, as I mentioned earlier. We'll revisit maintenance a little later. We're actually going to dive into administration here. One of the things I really like about Connect Director, which was a great improvement over the previous 14.2 product, which is an older iteration of the same is how easy it is to find items. Anybody that's familiar with the product, you can probably think of examples where options maybe appear to be buried in the system. There's a really easy way to kind of cut through that Gordian knot and go directly towards what you're finding or looking for is go ahead and type it in the top left. That's going to be the easiest way to search for terms that are related to what you're looking for. In this case, I was looking for dial plan, and you can see here it actually came up directly in there. You can do that for anything in the administration system, and it'll go find what you're looking for you. Anybody familiar with the Windows Start menu, the later versions? That's a really useful tool that's related to this. So we'll go ahead and blank that out. It automatically reverts back to administration. We'll dive in at the top here into users. You'll see here I have a couple users built in the system. The extension length, that's configurable. Most customers are between 3 and 5 with other variations you can use based on business needs. Client username, things like that. These are going to be dependent on if you're using Active Directory or not, or Active Directory authentication. Once you get into the user accounts themselves, it's going to behoove you from the very beginning of the system installation to come up with some best practices as far as username conventions, making sure everybody's email addresses are populated, what the extension ranges are going to be, things like that. Everybody kind of defaults to 4-digit extensions these days for systems up to a certain size. Obviously, larger systems are going to start growing beyond what is available in 4-digit extension systems. And yes, you can expand beyond that fairly easily. As always, everything comes with appropriate planning. So when if you currently have a MiVoice Connect system or any other system, and you're interested in getting some feedback from IPC, we're always here to help, even if we're not currently your partner. We'd love the opportunity to talk to you, take a look at what your current systems look like, what your business needs are, and make sure they match really well together. When we're looking into screens like this, and again, maybe we have hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of users, we want to make sure that we are able to go directly to what we're looking for. Obviously, we can sort or search by somebody's first name, and it'll find Paul. However, what happens if we have 100 Pauls in the system? Just searching by Paul is not going to be very easy or very useful. Maybe I know his last name starts with A. I'm just not sure what it is, or maybe I'm not sure how to spell it. That wildcard search using the asterisk is going to be very valuable. It's still going to find every user, first name Paul, last name starting with A, and that's going to help you a lot. In larger systems or even in smaller systems where you just don't want to have to scroll through 400 users, this will allow you to go directly to them. This works not only in the user field, it also works in screens such as trunk groups. If you have a large number of trunk groups, searching telephone MAC addresses, the names or IP addresses of appliances and switches, servers, things like that. It's a very useful tool that you want to keep in the back of your mind. Another item that I'd like to call out here, and as I revert this, when you pull up a new screen in Director, one of the things that people like to do is uncheck Paul and check Winston. You can absolutely do that. It's not the quickest way. Obviously, you had to uncheck and check a few things. Clicking on the item that you want to select is going to be the fastest way to do it. One of the things that I'd like to warn you, though, and as part of administrator training, I want to make sure you never fall into this trap, is if you pull up the screen, Paul's automatically going to be selected. If you want to delete Winston, a lot of times somebody will scroll down to Winston's account and click on that. And if Paul was way up at the top, they're going to forget he was still selected. So when you go to delete, the nice thing is it'll say bulk delete here. So it'll warn you that you're about to delete 2 records. But I like to call out in all these administrator trainings that I do, make sure that you're single clicking on an item that you want to delete so multiple items aren't deleted by accident. All this documentation is actually available as we go over through the tabs here in the documentation tab. The system today, the webinar today, we only have 45 minutes. Definitely not enough time to get into all the nooks and crannies of the system. Highly capable system is always going to have a fair amount of complexity that you can really only fully explore by going through the guides. You can access those guides through the documentation tab here. If you have any questions, I highly, again, recommend reaching out to IPC at any time. We have people standing by to address any questions, even if they're not directly applicable to your current system configuration. Reading guides often gives you ideas for, hey, I heard that my business or my users need this feature. I couldn't figure out how to do it 3 months ago, but reading through this guide, this sounds like a great idea. I just want to be sure that it's going to meet my needs. Again, reach out to us. We're happy to talk through that with you. As we go through the user account configuration, it itself has a lot of tabs here down at the bottom. We can scroll down. DIDs are the numbers we can assign to the user accounts. All this information that we configure, sometimes you don't want other users in the system to be able to find maybe a CEO or a president of the company or anything to dial them directly. The make extension private option is very useful, as well as the include in system dial by name directory. If I don't want other people to find Winston and be able to call him directly, maybe I want to make sure he stays in his cubicle head down 8 hours a day and not get bothered. Using those two settings there is going to be very valuable. Caller ID, as always, we want to make sure that we're sending out the appropriately marketed number to the outside people that we're calling, the external parties. This is where you can configure your phone system, known as a PBX, to actually send out a custom caller ID. Planning for this custom caller ID is going to be critical in talking to your carrier. Whether you're using analog trunks, PRI, SIP, you want to make sure you're talking to the carrier as those are, before those are installed in the planning phase, to make sure that if your phone system sends out a caller ID, they're going to be willing and able to pass that out. A lot of times customers come to us that maybe they switched to a new trunk group, or they just installed a new phone circuit and caller ID isn't working. Immediately it's either the phone system isn't working or the carrier is blocking the number. I like to tell people when I'm troubleshooting issues is we don't know until we actually dig into the issue. The phone system may be sending it and the carrier may be blocking it, or maybe the phone system isn't configured to send the caller ID that's being written out in the user accounts. Again, you run into issues like this, please reach out to us and we can help resolve those types of issues as efficiently and quickly as possible for you. Going down here, we have license types. The type of license, you really only have 3 options. You have extension only, which is not going to come with a voice mailbox. You have a voice mailbox only, and then you have the extension to mailbox, which is 99% of the time what is going to be used. Then you actually go into the access license, which is slightly different. Each of these access licenses, I'm not going to go into detail on the main or all the differences between these. Connect client is going to be the most popular one because that's going to allow a user to use the Connect desktop client for the MiVoice Connect solution. Adds a lot of versatility and power and capability beyond even what the IP phone itself is capable of. IP phones, they're really limited by the number of physical buttons that are on the physical phone. As always, in a software application, you're not limited to that. If you need a new button, you can see on the screen in the top left, we can create new programmable buttons. Really, the sky's the limit within there. As you go beyond that, you have the work group license types and the operator license types that even add additional functionality beyond that. Again, the MiVoice Connect documentation is a good place to go for that, or if you have questions, reach out to IPC. User account is going to actually say what permissions the user has access to and what capabilities they're allowed to do within the phone system. You can select their user account within this drop-down box. If you want to actually take a look at what that user account is configured to allow them to do, the system offers these really handy hyperlinks. that you can select, and it'll go right to executive user group. And you can start going through all the class of services. Those are the COSs for telephony, call permissions, voicemail permissions, and configuration items and things like that. Going back to the user accounts here, and going back down to the user group portion of Connect Director, the user account page, we see here that all users are going to default to the headquarters site. Anytime you create a new user account, that's where the user account is going to be placed, is that top level site. If you have multiple sites in your system, all other sites are going to be child sites below headquarters. A lot of times I have new administrators ask me, why does a user show up at headquarters if they're actually physically located in another location, maybe a California office? That's a logical configuration. The system determines where a user is located by what IP phone they're assigned to. If an IP phone that they're assigned to is located or registered to the California office, by assigning them to the IP phone, they're going to be moved to the California site. So that's an important item to remember. If you have a bunch of users showing up at the headquarters site and they're not assigned to IP phones, chances are some of them may actually be located at other sites. And to fix that, you can just assign them to an IP phone there. Moving down, another popular issue that I run into is primary phone port shows up as the MAC address of one phone. MAC addresses for the Mitel phones are asking you to start with 001049. But with newer phone models coming out, that is not as true as it was anymore. The issue that I run into is the current phone port is actually a different IP phone MAC address. What that tells me is they actually used the extension assignment feature where a user can go to another IP phone, either in the same office or another office, access their voicemail system by signing in, and then within the voicemail options, select 731. Those are all three separate options, by the way, not all one option. And by doing that, the system will move their user account assignment temporarily to the new phone port. The reason why it's really important to focus on that, the temporary aspect of that assignment, is the expectation is the user should revert back to the primary phone port at some point. That primary phone port is where their kind of home base is. That's where we would expect them to be located the majority of the time. So before they leave the office, best practice is do the same thing, access the voicemail system and sign in, authenticate with their voicemail passcode, and then this time select options 732. That actually moves them back to their primary phone port. That's really important because if you have users such as sales reps or senior level executives that travel around to multiple offices frequently and like to move their user account assignment to different phones so they can continue addressing inbound and outbound calls, if they forget to revert back to their primary phone port, it's hard for the system to keep everything synchronized with multiple temporary assignments on the same user account. An easy way for us administrators to resolve this is if somebody calls in and says, I forgot to unassign myself in the last 3 offices and I just assigned myself to a new phone, and about an hour into it, everything stopped working. Just go into Director here and click this Go to Primary Phone button. I spent a decent amount of time reviewing this because it's such an easy way to resolve this issue. Is it will move them back to their primary phone, get rid of all those synchronization issues, and remove all the previous temporary assignments. And then at that point, they can create a new temporary assignment in the new office. As always, this is dependent on us as administrators keeping the system configured to where the primary phone ports are assigned to whatever IP phone they're going to be located at the majority of the time. The system is only as good as how we configure it and how we maintain it. Configuration even, if this system was installed 6 months ago, it's good to go in here and check for any user accounts that the current port doesn't match the primary port, and just reach out to the user asking them, hey, did you recently move to a new office? Things like that. That's a good system cleanup and maintenance task for us. Moving down through here, we can see the jack number. That can be used in a very useful manner for additional identification information. Not going to go into too much detail here. The documentation has some really good points on how that can be used. Mailbox server, if you have a highly distributed system, the headquarters server itself is going to be kind of the core top level server that provides not only voicemail functionality, but a lot of IVR greeting functionality and a lot of other database management processes and things like that. A really good rule of thumb is the more you can move off the headquarters in a highly distributed system, the better. Let's say you have 100 sites. It's good to create child servers known as distributed voicemail servers or DVSs in core geographical locations with good WAN connectivity and things like that, and move all the voicemail boxes off the headquarters server and let those child servers do that work. The more you can do that, the more it frees up the headquarters server to make sure to address core system tasks such as database updates, configuration updates, synchronization tasks, things like that. With user accounts, as always, there's a level of authentication. And here we can select the client password if you're doing phone system or PBX authentication. However, you don't have to worry about this if you're doing Active Directory authentication via LDAP integration. So if your system is configured to use ADI integration, don't worry about the client password. Going through some additional tabs here, we can configure the number of calls a user can address. We can change nifty things like their ringtone. We can change their wallpaper if they have one of the color IP phone models. Today I'm talking to you on a wireless headset. I use that the majority of the time. So my automatic off-hook presence, when I place a call, the IP phone immediately tries to send the call to my wireless headset. So if you have a user that's always placing calls and it goes out their speakerphone and they don't like that, you can save them some pain and kind of make their lives easier by switching their preference there. Making sure we cover everything in a good amount of time. Going to skip over some of these items. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out to us outside of this webinar or submit a question. Trunk access code is going to be important. If you have multiple trunk groups in your system, you can configure some trunk groups to use the trunk access code 9, which is the most popular. However, a lot of times administrators will actually switch to the trunk access code 8. If you ever dealt with users accidentally dialing 911, it's very easy for somebody to dial 9 and then 1 for the international code and then accidentally hit 1 again. That's going to place a 911 call, and your system will automatically do that regardless of if the user meant that as a trunk access code. And easy way to get around that is to switch your trunk access code to 8. Quick fix there. And by quick fix, I mean either appropriate planning in the beginning or it is fairly painless to do this after the fact with appropriate user training and administration. Not going to get into fax support here, but it is an option. Fax over IP. Right now, it's mainly a voice over IP system, but VoIP is always an interesting project to work on, and the system does accommodate several settings there. Voicemail password is going to be a separate authentication mechanism besides the client password. The client password is what they're going to use to sign into the desktop client. The voicemail password is what they're going to use when they actually access their voicemail box. It's going to be completely numeric, unlike the client password, and this is where you'd manage that. If somebody calls in and says they're not able to sign into their voicemail anymore, this is probably the first step that you're going to take, is making sure that the correct voicemail password is set in there. All these passwords do have configurations available to where they're valid for a specific period of time. We'll go into the security section a little later here. You can deliver voicemails via email via this section, a very handy feature. It's important to remember there are different ways you can deliver email notifications of voicemails. You can either deliver an email that just says, hey, you have a new notification, and that's a text-only notification. you can deliver a WAV file attached to that email where they can double click on the WAV file, and you can have the voicemail attached as a link. It's the reason why it's important to remember this is a lot of users get confused by these options. If they're only configured to receive the WAV files, if they play those, the voicemails are not going to play through their IP phone. It's not going to engage the phone system, though those WAV files are going to play via a local media player. A lot of users don't understand that. They know they want the voicemail to be received via email, but they don't understand the back-end functionality. That's our jobs. So we want to make sure we're selecting the appropriate option to fulfill their business need. Automatic message forwarding is a very useful option for users that go on vacation. We can actually set it to forward all their voicemails to another mailbox. Make sure to select the option delete message after forwarding to make sure that their mailbox does not fill up while they're out of the office. Routing offers a lot of really useful configurations for routing calls outside of the system. Let's say maybe they want to send a call out to their cell phone instead of to their IP phone. We can actually create a new label and send the calls to an external number. And instead of all the calls being routed by the phone system to their IP phone, they can switch this, and maybe they're going to take a meeting with a customer out of the office. They'll still be able to receive their calls on an external phone number. RingMe is fairly similar, actually. You can set up simultaneous ring to where not only will it ring their IP phone, it will also send the caller external cell phone number. It's one of my favorites that I leave configured to make sure I don't miss calls. Availability states, this is where we're going to define what happens to calls based on what state their user account and IP phone are assigned to. Available is it's going to ring the phone 3 times and then send to voicemail. Other states, it's going to send the voicemail or the call directly to voicemail because obviously they're either out of the office or otherwise engaged in a meeting or otherwise. You can change these defaults in the system. Power routing rules, we're not going to get into on this, but again, reference the documentation and it gives really good information there. Membership, this is where you can actually define groups that the extensions are a part of. So we can add this user account to a distribution list. We can create work groups and place them in work groups, more on work groups later. And the membership tab allows you to add a new user account to multiple group lists right at the same time. That way you don't have to go to a distribution list and then jump over to a work group. Again, that ease of administration is a hallmark of the MiVoice Connect system. The applications, this is where you can assign a user to be able to use Conference Bridge solution offered by the phone system as well as instant messaging. Once you build an appliance, you can access that appliance in this drop-down box, and that'll offer them these functionalities. And this is where you can actually, in the DNS tab, assign new or multiple phone numbers. Let's say for whatever reason, as an example, you have a user that was just hired to replace somebody else. You want them to have their unique phone number that's never been used before that they can publish out to customers, but you also want the new user to maybe address calls that were previously addressed by a previous employee. Here, you can actually add additional phone numbers onto their user account, and all the phone numbers will route to their user account, which will then send it to whatever endpoint they have assigned, IP phone or external number, soft phone possibly, things like that. Jumping over through administration here, we can actually go through additional programmable buttons. As I mentioned, we can go into or create a client toolbar and actually add additional functionality to the Connect desktop client that's not there by default. We can do the same thing to IP phone buttons. We can configure their buttons to do new and cool things that by default they're not designed to do. All the options, as you can see, are fairly extensive. For listing an actual description of all of these, again, the documentation is going to be the gold standard for what those all do. Escalation profiles, we're not going to get into this at this point, but again, it's very easy to use that to give enhanced functionality to the user accounts. We already covered user groups here, so we can skip over that safely. But under user groups, you actually have these the sub-features, the telephony class of service, the call permissions class of service, and the voicemail permissions class of service. This is where you actually define what the user account is able to do when it's assigned to the user group that has these class of services assigned to it. Things like call stack depth, as we mentioned, how many calls they're able to address simultaneously, how many contacts they're allowed, and the actual features of the system they're able to engage. Call permissions, are they able to address local, long distance, even international, or do we only want them to address extension to extension calls? This is where we can define that. Voicemail permissions, obviously this is going to be primarily the number of voicemails and the size and length of voicemails that they're able to store. I mentioned earlier you can change the availability state default, so when you create a new user account, maybe you want to give them more time to address new calls or answer the call before it goes to voicemail. This is where you can change that to 4 all the way up to even 20. So 1 to 20 is the availability there. Be careful changing any system defaults. Again, if we do a search, you can see that there are a few defaults, call control options things. Changing those defaults will change global configurations in some cases, so be very careful. Then we get into trunk groups. Again, we mentioned earlier that the system could have multiple types of phone circuits attached to it addressing inbound and outbound external calls. Those phone circuits are going to be correlated to what we know as trunk groups. We have here an example PRI trunk group and an example SIP trunk group. We also have various flavors of analog line trunk groups that we can configure in the system, depending on what sort of analog line the carrier is presenting to the phone system. Analog lines are slowly going away. Carriers are slowly phasing out that infrastructure. So everything is going more towards PRI and even more towards SIP. Everything is SIP on the back end, and even if you have a PRI, 99% chance it's going to actually be SIP that the carrier is routing to you before they break it out as a new PRI. Within these trunk groups, obviously we have a lot of configuration options here. The profile type, this is going to be important when you build a new trunk group or you're troubleshooting an issue on an existing trunk group. You have to make sure the profile assigned to the trunk group matches the kind of profile defaults that the carrier is using. If this profile is something different from maybe the default ITSP and you're running into an issue, you may want to visit this. The best way to troubleshoot any issues with this is to work or place live calls while on the phone with a carrier technician. They have an ability to run traces and tell you what they're seeing. At the same time, you run what's known as the trunk test tool on the headquarters server, so you can both see how live calls are being addressed. If you start seeing errors, then it's likely that there's a communication issue between the two systems. Again, every system out there, most systems out there are highly capable. It's just a matter of finding a configuration that works for both of them. Inbound is the inbound tab is going to define how the phone system is able to translate calls that are coming in from the carrier, including the number of digits we're expecting from the carrier. We can see here that this is where we can enable DNIS and DID ranges, and advanced options such as extension translation tables, tandem trunking, things like that, often use tying two systems together. We won't get into that there, but it does offer the functionality. With outbound trunk group capabilities, this is where we can define the trunk access code. So if you have the PRI trunk group that uses a trunk access code of 9, and a SIP trunk group that uses the access code of 8, that's an easy way that users can define which trunk group their call will go out on. You want to define local area code, that way your calls are being addressed appropriately, not only by the internal phone system. It wants to route the calls to whatever phone circuit is going to be local and is cost efficient for your company, but also for the carrier. And we can define here trunk services such as local calling, long distance calling, even international calling. If you have customer or users forwarding calls out to their external phones, enabling original caller information is going to be useful. If a call comes in and the phone system sends that incoming call back out to their cell phone, if you do not have this checked, the caller ID they will see will most likely be their own phone number. They won't be able to see who is actually calling them. Enabling this option will allow you to configure their call forwarding to actually forward the original caller ID information that came into the phone system. Very useful. The rest of the options here are where we can define the ranges of numbers that we have coming in on our different phone circuits. We can see here what numbers are assigned to destinations, such as a user account here. Not always a user account though. We can assign numbers to auto attendants. Those are going to be our IVRs, our hunt groups, our work groups, different call control destinations. Our DNIS map is going to show the additional numbers sent to those destinations. So again, we had that user account that had the primary phone number. That's their own phone number ending in 5310. But we had a secondary number that we assigned to them. Maybe it was assigned to a previous employee and we wanted Paul to be able to address that. We also assigned that number to them as well. I'm going to skip over a couple items. Again, off-system extensions, we can use those to tie various systems together. Conferencing, we're going to use for conference bridges. SIP profiles, that's where we can actually change the defaults, customize those. Normally, the default ITSP is what we're going to be using, but this is where we can make changes to that. Again, and as always, make sure to remember that if you change this, it will change every trunk group that the default ITSP profile is applied to. Same for ISDN profiles for PRIs. Make sure if we're changing these that it's understood that the change will replicate through all PRI trunk groups that use that profile. The telephone section makes it very easy to see all the telephones that are registered to the system. As a new install, we don't have any telephones registered here, but this is where you would see the MAC address that you could actually change under the name to maybe you want to use a custom naming convention. There are use cases for that. The MAC address will still remain under the MAC address field here. It will actually show you what site the IP phone is registered to, as well as what switch addressed that registration, and what IP address the IP phone received, likely from DHCP if it's not manually configured, which it rarely is, and user accounts that it is assigned to either the current temporary assignment or the home assignment. This is the page that I mentioned earlier that you're going to want to use to maybe sort by current user and then kind of go down the list and just scan it really quick, maybe 10, 15 minutes, depending on the size of your system, just to make sure that you don't have a high number of users that are showing up as a high number of phones that are showing up with a mismatch between current user and home user. That home user is going to be the primary phone port. If you see a large number, it may be a good time to go contact some of those users and make sure they haven't moved offices or things like that. IP phone address map is where we're going to define what IP ranges or subnets are being used by each office location. So if we want a phone to register to headquarters, we can go ahead and create one or more IP phone address maps for the headquarters site. However, we can create additional ranges for child sites, maybe our California site on the West Coast, things like that. The caller's emergency service identifier, or CSID, is going to be very useful. You want to make sure you're populating this. That deals with 911. As a warning to all of our current attendees, 911 calls or 911 laws are coming out, new ones that define new requirements that companies should be following and are legally required to follow. IPC is ahead of the curve on this, making sure that we're letting our customers know that the system has the capability to meet the 911 needs, whatever they are. But please reach out to us so we can make sure the system is either currently configured or make sure to get your system configured for you to meet those needs and legal requirements. Skipping over a couple of these here in the interest of time. our IP phone options. This is where we're actually going to enable IP phone failover for some resiliency in your system. So if maybe a phone switch goes down or a site goes down for whatever reason, a part of the network, if that goes down, the IP phones are going to be able to fail over to some spare equipment that we can configure in the system. This is where we can enable that, as well as default passwords and such. Expanding the capability of the system is primarily going to be done in this page. This is where we'd add new appliances, phone switches, trunk switches, conference bridge appliances, things like that, to add additional functionality and capacity to the system. This includes even those distributed voicemail servers that I mentioned earlier. Music on hold, we can actually enable file-based music on hold where you can upload your own custom file, and that'll override the default. And this is where we can define those local extensions that are used in the system to play that music on hold out for each server. The system functions by using some system default extensions. These are where we can change those system default extensions. But again, when you change defaults, make sure that it can have an adverse impact on the system if not planned appropriately. One of the main benefits of MiVoice Connect is the increased security architecture, leveraging SSL certificates. This is where we can actually import third-party CA certificates into the system to secure the communications beyond the standard self-signed certificates the system runs on. This is where we can deploy our spare equipment. So we can deploy a spare phone switch up at the headquarters site. Let's say maybe there's a hardware failure on a switch at a child site. If there is a spare phone switch available and IP phone failover is enabled, those child side IP phones can move their registrations up to the spare switch. A more accurate way to describe that, now that I've talked that through, is the spare switch will temporarily be assigned to the child site. The phones will move to the spare switch. They will continue to function. The switch will address the call setup, tear down, things like that. And it's important to remember in this scenario, the switches will not automatically fail back up to the headquarters site and become a spare again if the original switch comes back into service. It's rare, but it does happen that outages occur. And if an outage does occur, feel free to reach out to us and we can take a look at the system, not only to identify or help you identify a root cause, but also to make sure that the system fails back to its bare state. So it's available in case of another outage in the future. Features is where we can actually get into the system directory and see all the various call control objects and what extensions are assigned to each in the system. We can see here that Paul shows up in our system directory, and we can see Paul's information as well as Winston's information. We can hide this from this information by stating don't display the information in the system directory. So this system directory is where Connect desktop clients are going to pull user information or even auto tenant information to where a user can easily dial one of those call control objects. The auto attendants, also known as IVRs or interactive voice response menus, these are where these menus are going to be configured. We are going to name the auto attendants and assign custom extensions, define how long users have to enter multiple digits, or maybe if they are dialing a 4-digit extension, how long they have to enter that. This is where we can assign multiple numbers to the auto attendant. And this is where we can define what happens when a call comes in per these schedules. Auto attendants are not the only call routing mechanism. We also have hunt groups, work groups down here, paging groups, pickup groups, route points, a great thing to use to send calls outside of the system. All these call control objects are going to be provide unique functionality. For the differences, again, the documentation is going to be the gold standard. If you ever run into an issue where you're trying to accommodate a user request or a customer request, let us know and we can help you with that. The system administration is going to give you more of the detailed configurations, such as trusted IP range, or ranges, things like that, where you can change your dial plan. Skipping over here, we can import our licenses into this section so we can actually see what licenses we have. As you can see here, it's a new system, so we haven't actually applied any licenses. Where we can apply our new keys will be this section. And we can add administrators in under the administrators list and define their roles as well. So obviously all administrators shouldn't have unrestricted access to the system. We can restrict that down. Security will allow us to change our password policy and things like that. We can run default reports in the system. Very useful for tracking down specific call examples, items like that. Again, we have all of our documentation here. If you're looking for documentation regarding something specific, please reach out to us. We can leverage our partner access and to obtain additional Mitel documentation for you. And I highly recommend, if you have a current system, explore all the maintenance windows. This is going to be a great place to show you the current status of the system. Always remember, up at the top here, everything shows green. You're good. If you start seeing yellow or even red, you're probably going to want to dig into that and definitely reach out to us so we can help you with that. The last tab here, just going to mention really quick, we have a remote packet capture capability. Very useful to run short captures while replicating issues. Not very feasible for running very long captures. Maybe you have an issue that only occurs intermittently. Not going to be ideal to use this utility. About the max is 20 to 60 minutes, but it does have that capability. That's the review of Connect Director. Again, a very topical view. IPC hosts trainings anywhere from an hour up to multiple days. If you have a need for additional administrator training, please reach out to us and let us know, and we'd be happy to accommodate that. With that being said, I'm going to send it back to Stephen and let him take it from here.
Thanks, Simon. That was great. I did see a couple questions come in, but it looks like Simon addressed those throughout the training. The last big one was around if I'm experiencing call quality issues, where do you recommend I start troubleshooting? I think those logs that Simon just mentioned is the answer there. So with that, guys, I appreciate your time this afternoon. I hope this was valuable for you. I also encourage you to register for the upcoming webinars. They can be found on our website at ipctech.com/resources/webinars. We have a number of different ones coming up focused on wireless projects or moving infrastructure to AWS or Azure or GCP. Also talking about some more advanced reporting solutions available to couple with Mitel. Some really good seminars coming up. Encourage you to register. And with that, have a good afternoon and thank you.